Hi, I'm about to embark on another massive reading journey where I plan on frequently updating you as I go through it. So in addition to doing the same thing with the Lord of the Rings audiobook, I also plan on doing the same thing for the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer. I just can't wait to get into these. So these are, of course, very famous ancient poems that tell the story of the Trojan War and its aftermath. The Iliad tells the story of the last few weeks of the 10-year Greek-Trojan conflict. And, it has the Achilles and all of that stuff. It's got the gods picking different sides, which city they want to win or whatever. And then the Odyssey is the Greek hero Odysseus journeying home after the battle happens and facing all kinds of monsters and obstacles on the way. Now, the Odyssey I've read before, and I really enjoyed it, but it was a dated sort of prose translation. But what I have here are two very modern and acclaimed verse translations, so they maintain the poetic stanzas and lines and all that stuff. The other thing I have is the landmark Herodotus. I've read this before, but basically it's a massive history book written by a guy about 400 years after Homer lived. And this edition of the book is full of all of these maps that are period accurate with all the place names and things like that, photos of armor, photos of Greek fighting strategies and architecture, all these things. So that'll hopefully help me follow along on the hero's journey here. I've already read the introduction to the Iliad because I wanted to sort of bring myself up to speed. After all, Homer was writing this for an audience who was intimately familiar with this Troy story. So he throws you in the middle of it, and he doesn't even show you the ending of the conflict. So I knew that I should probably let myself know who the lead players are, what the key events are that he's interpreting. And the intro also did a great job contextualizing the culture of the Greeks and the values and the significance of certain actions and how they viewed the gods as forever having feuds with each other and sort of using humans and interfering in their affairs as sort of chess pieces to settle their own disputes or whatever, which is, interestingly enough, a pattern I kind of noticed cropping up in The Lord of the Rings. So I think it'll be interesting to finally read these classic tales which have influenced so many stories that followed them. I can't wait to share my updates with you guys, and I hope you enjoy following along with me as I read. I just started reading the Iliad by Homer as part of this big read-along I'm doing on my channel of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Whenever I start a new book, of course I'm a little bit uncertain about whether or not I'm going to like it, so I have to say that I'm pretty optimistic. Now that I've read books 1 and 2 out of 24 in the Odyssey, I think I'm going to like this. And part of that is helped by the fact that I've read the Odyssey years ago. And right from the start of reading the Iliad, it came right back to me what this writing is like, for good and bad. I love how instead of natural dialogue, you get these big flowing speeches that are exchanged back and forth between characters. There are repetitive descriptions, for example, rosy-fingered Dawn or swift-footed Achilles, that are used every time those things are brought up as sort of a shorthand for the oral storytellers that would have been telling this to a crowd. And then on the bad end of those things, there's the lists, because the end of book 2 is just an enormous 12-page list of the armies that were involved in this war and where they came from and who was commanding them. Just a massive torrent, and I have to admit, I skimmed that section a little bit. But anyway, I'm very glad that I gave myself a refresher on the Trojan War via some YouTube videos, because this book throws you right the fuck into it. You don't even get told why the war started in the first place. Instead, you just get this, oh, muses, tell me of the time that Achilles let his wrath and pride get the better of him to the ruination of all Greeks around him. And you're like, oh shit, I thought Achilles was supposed to be revered among the Greeks. And then from there, you get this inciting incident where it's Agamemnon and Achilles fighting over women as property. And given that this is the Trojan War and Helen of Troy is the main fighting point, that is probably going to be a theme we're going to see cropping up quite a bit. And anyway, Agamemnon takes Achilles' sex slave, and he decides to react by heroically moping around on a beach and letting his army just sit around playing tiddlywinks instead of, helping in the fight. So that's pretty pathetic. And speaking of pathetic, we also get a look at the gods and their dynamics and how they have picked sides in this battle, and they're kind of pitting one another against each other and using the humans as pawns to settle this big feud that they're having. So yeah, it's pretty ridiculous, but I'm very excited to see where this goes, and I think I'm going to enjoy it. Hopefully that continues to be the case. Hi, I'm in the middle of recording update videos for my read-alongs, first for Lord of the Rings, and now for the Iliad. So last night I managed to read 3 chapters or books of the Iliad, so now I'm up to book 6. So I'm really happy with how fast I'm getting through it here. And a lot has happened. But in another sense, not a lot has happened at all, because we left the status quo of the Greeks and Trojans fighting each other, and we took this long circuitous route back around to the Greeks and Trojans fighting each other. It all started with both sides realizing, hey, after 10 years of war, we've learned that this sucks, actually. So why don't we finish things up with a 1-versus-1 fight to the death between Menelaus, the Greek, and Paris, the Trojan. And I was just wondering, why on earth didn't you guys figure you should do this at the start of the war? And then it started to hit me what's going on here. The Iliad is trying to use its span of a few weeks at the end of the conflict as a microcosm for the entire conflict. For example, the first couple chapters covered this fight between Achilles and Agamemnon over the possession of this slave woman. Just like the entire war is being fought over Helen of Troy, and now we've got this fight to the death, which traditionally is supposed to be fought at the start of the war. But yeah, so I have to assume that this pattern of echoing the entire span of the war is going to continue here. But anyway, Paris got his ass handed to him and fled the battle. I guess Homer really wants the Trojans to come across like sneaky cowards. And the Trojans, though, are so fed up with the war and with Paris that they decide, hey, you guys win, we're done, so we're just going to settle up, there's going to be a truce, and we'll be right back. But the gods haven't had enough bloodshed yet, so Hera and Athena want to see Troy absolutely destroyed, take no prisoners, whatever. So they manipulate Trojan to breaking the truce by shooting Menelaus with an arrow, and then the Greeks get right back into fighting the Trojans. And this is where I realized I'm probably not going to like the Iliad as much as I like the Odyssey, because if it's just going to be wall-to-wall fighting, then it's going to be a pretty intimidating thing to get through, because with these ancient poems, fighting is basically, this guy did this guy was killed by this guy, with these short backstories to every character that's being killed or doing the killing. But there are some highlights within that. Diomedes is a badass. Not only is he kicking the asses of so many Trojans, but any god that happens to stand up on the Trojans' behalf is also getting their ass handed to him by Diomedes. So there are some highlights, but overall it's a pretty intimidating read so far. I just finished reading up to book 9 in the Iliad, or chapter 9, and while I'm still really sort of enjoying it and getting some fun out of it, it's not as lovable as I was hoping it would be going into it. And it's for the reasons that I kind of brought up last time, which is it's mostly battling, and the battling is mostly just this guy kills this guy, here is a backstory, this guy's killed by this guy, here is a backstory, and after a while of this over and over and over again, it becomes pretty daunting. Now, Homer does have ways of breaking up the battle with just sort of action that happens off to the side to kind of advance the story, but even those diversions end up being circuitous routes back to the status quo, when I started reading today, the Trojans decide that they're getting their ass handed to them by Diomedes, so they want to have this big ritual and prayer and sacrifice to Athena so that she can take him out of the battle for them. And Athena's just like, I hate you Trojans and I hope you all die. Goodbye. So that doesn't go anywhere. And then there's another fight to the death for some reason, this time between Ajax and Hector. That also doesn't come to anything because, the sun sets and then they're like, oh, look at the time. We don't want to fight past our bedtimes or anything, so see you later. And then when the Trojans retreat, they're just like, well, I guess we should surrender, right? Because they lost that last battle to the death, or we lost it. So is the war over? And they're just like, nah, let's just keep going with it. So what I'm focusing on, and what I'm probably getting the most out of, is the drama between the gods. For a while I was like, why are they even worshipping these assholes? They know, like the mortals know that the gods are completely feckless or whatever. And it turns out that if you have a god on your side, it really helps you out, and you really don't want to get a god angry at you either. So that is coming into play in a big way in the story, to the point where Zeus has to put his foot down. He gathers all the gods together and is just like, if any of you fight on behalf of either side again, I'm going to kick you clean the fuck out of Olympus. So they're just like, well, fine, we'll just give them really good advice instead. Now, one of the other struggles that I'm kind of dealing with reading this is the repetition here. I realize it's a poem, so these are kind of like choruses, but for example, there's a part where a god tells a dream to a guy, the guy has the dream, and then he tells the dream to his troops. So verbatim, we get like the same paragraph about what the dream is. So things like that are kind of a challenge for a modern reader, but reminding myself of the format and its strengths, I'm just like, okay, that's just how these things go. So yeah, overall I am still enjoying it, but it does have its difficulties for sure. Hi, I just got to book 13 in the Iliad. So since last time I've read a pretty big chunk, almost 100 pages, and that brings me to about halfway into this book. So I'm pretty happy with how fast I'm getting through it, and finally we seem to be getting out of the repetitive, cyclical sort of tailspin that we've been in since the start of the story, where it's like just the Greeks and Trojans fighting with like the occasional side story diversion thrown in. And now it seems to be moving in a direction because Zeus has told the other Greek gods to stop fighting on either side and just leave it alone. And so Zeus is the only one really interfering, and he's interfering on behalf of the Trojans, who he has a bias towards. So the Greeks are getting their asses kicked. They've been beaten clean back to their ships, and it's like the last day or two that they can hold out before they either have to stand and fight to the death or all get on their ships and row away. And so in desperation, they go to Achilles, and Achilles, I thought he was going to be the hero of this story, but he's just been sitting his ass on the beach for half of this Iliad story because Agamemnon took his precious sex slave from him, so they offer him literally everything. They offer him land and money and fame beyond his wildest imagination, and also the woman who was stolen from him. All will be returned if only you come and fight for us, and for some reason that's not enough. He's just like, well, I was just so insulted that I think I'd rather see just all of you die before I get over myself. But, there's other stuff going on. They're also trying to figure out the Trojan plan for their deaths, so they sent a bunch of people off at night to try and discern their plans and also kill a bunch of people, and there's other stuff going up, but basically what's been setting up here is the conflict that I know will rouse Achilles out of his stupor here and make him actually take up arms and use his almost godlike power to help the Greeks out here. I know what happens, I know what's coming, I just don't know when it's coming, because, there's a lot of famous paintings and art about what's about to happen in the story here, but it's just like every book into the Iliad that I read, I'm like, is it going to happen now? What about now? Is it happening now? So I'm really anticipating the chain of events that sets off the real action here. There are some challenges still coming. Like there's this part where Nestor tells this multi-page long story about like back in my day when I was a true warrior. And so there's a lot of like tangents that go way off into the weeds. But I am liking it more. I'm enjoying the setting and the fantasy elements of it. It's pretty cool. Another update for the Iliad, and once again, I've read pretty much 100 pages since last time, which brings me to 2/3 of the way into the book. And the reason I didn't update in a while is because, once again, there wasn't that much to talk about. We were still, despite the Greeks being on the back foot and about to be defeated and all this stuff, you didn't really get the sense of that from the writing because we had this seesawing back and forth of who was winning and this guy killed this guy killed this guy sort of writing that to me reminds me of those sections of the Bible that are like so and so begat so and so over and over and over and over again. So I was kind of going cross-eyed just waiting for the big moment to happen where Patroclus famously rides out and the whole plot changes. Now I guess I can spoil it here because I kind of have to in order to talk about it. But it finally happened. At the end of book 16, so I'm now up to book 17, Patroclus rides out with Achilles' armor pretending to be him in order to scare the shit out of the Trojans, because the Trojans know that Achilles is next to invincible. And while he does this, he dies. So now Achilles, who is Patroclus' best buddy, is going to get so furious that he's going to finally stop moping 2/3 of the way into this gigantic story and go out and start just destroying the Trojans. So hopefully now the story is going to change away from this holding pattern that it's been stuck in since the start. So I already knew that this was coming, right? Back when I was in art university, we would break a lot of paintings down into their full context of what they were about and whatever. So we looked at The Death of Patroclus by Jacques-Louis David, and that's where I learned about it. But even though I knew it was coming, I was surprised at the way it played out in a few ways. One way is that it's Achilles' idea to send Patroclus out like this, which is so weird to me because Achilles' grudge is supposed to be so overwhelming that he doesn't want to help the Greeks in any way. But here he is putting the armor on Patroclus and being like, oh, you go ride out in my place and this will help the Greeks and it'll protect the ships and all this. And it's like, well, if you want all these things and if you want Patroclus to be safe and for this to be successful, why don't you just go out and fight? After all, you're the stronger warrior and you know that. The other thing is that Patroclus gets found out really quickly. But anyway, aside from that, I'm just sitting here hoping that this breaks up the monotony and the cyclical nature of this story so far. I totally understand now why people usually start with reading the Odyssey as opposed to this. But anyway, wish me luck going into the rest of it. I decided that rather than wait another 100 pages before I give you another update on where I'm at in the Iliad, I would just read a couple more books or chapters and then give you my update. So last time, I thought Achilles was really raring to go. Patroclus had gone down. So now we're going to get into the fighting, right? Well, I should learn to never underestimate how slow-paced the Iliad can be, because here we are, a full 2 books later, and he's still not fighting yet. He wants to now, but he's waiting on his goddess mother to cash in a favor with Hephaestus to forge him new magical armor, because he lost his last godlike armor to Hector after he killed Patroclus. So yeah, we have 1 book of that, and then another book of just fighting over Patroclus's body. That's a recurring motif that I've been seeing through this, is this importance of a person's body, making sure the armor doesn't get stripped, making sure the body doesn't get disgraced or abused or whatever, because as it says in the introduction to this book, the ancient Greeks saw bodies as still that person in essence. So just like you wouldn't want a living person to face indignity, you wouldn't want their body to, because I guess the soul is still kind of somewhat imbued in the corpse. And the other thing that's really interesting is the way that the gods and goddesses have weighed the balances of fate here. It's like every single aspect of how this unfolds, down to the most trivial things like whether or not your weapons hit home, are down to whether the gods are on your side or will it to happen. It's very similar to like Abrahamic religions, where every little thing that happens is part of God's plan in some way, except as opposed to, oh, God is mysterious and unknowable and all that. In ancient Greek mythology, the gods are knowable, but the outcome of what happens to you is down to what their feud is like go up in Mount Olympus. So, for example, it's like after a battle or whatever, the Greeks retroactively tell themselves these fan fictions about why the gods and goddesses were fighting each other in such a way that it led to such and such an outcome happening. And I find that interesting. Like, how interesting would it be to live your entire life thinking that, oh, this part of my life went this way because Zeus was fighting with Hera, and Hera had the upper hand at this particular moment, which is why it went this way, because Hera's my patron goddess or whatever. So rather than giving you the beat by beat here, I kind of want to tell you sort of the motifs that are catching my attention, because I'm still kind of waiting for Achilles to join the battle here. So hopefully that happens. Hi, I'm about to finish the Iliad. I can't believe how quickly I got through it, but here we are. I'm up to book 22. I've read 3 chapters since my last update, and now I just have 2 books left, and so there we go. Things are actually getting pretty good. Achilles is finally ready to join the fight, but before he did, he told everybody how it's totally not his fault that he spent the entire book up until this point moping on a beach over his sex slave being stolen. No, in fact, it was the gods who put that horrible thought of anger and pettiness in his head. So don't blame him. And that's basically his way of saying, I'm not going to be apologizing for this. So after that, he finally gets into fighting, and it's just carnage right from the get-go. Absolute slaughter, and the gods get in on it too. Zeus decides not to hold the gods back anymore, and so they join the fray, and it's not long before Achilles starts to get a dressing down and is nearly killed by a river god that he pisses off because he chokes his river with the corpses of his enemies. You know, this is getting metal as fuck. Anyway, so the god nearly drowns him, but then Achilles goes crying to his gods, and they come down and say they basically set the river on fire until he's like, okay, fine, Achilles can cross me to fight the Trojans or whatever. And I just want to say, Athena is my favorite god, is my favorite character across this whole thing, which is good news because she's going to be the patron goddess of Odysseus in the Odyssey, so I can't wait for that. But she gets called a bitch multiple times by other gods, including the god of war, Ares. She responds by picking up a boulder and throwing at it and breaking his neck and squashing him like an insect. But she's not done yet, because she gets into a fight with Artemis and slaps her around the face with her own bow and sends her crying off to Zeus. Where has Athena been? She is awesome, and I was not only really excited and engaged by this, but I was also laughing quite a bit. Finally, humor has entered the Iliad. So these last few books have been actually a lot of fun. I wish that more of the Iliad had had this kind of stuff in it, and I am actually quite excited to get back into it for the final couple of chapters. Achilles versus Hector. Hector's been narrowly escaping Achilles' revenge this whole time, but now he's finally gonna get him against the wall, and we're gonna see where it goes. But I'm enjoying it, and I hope you're enjoying my updates as I go. I did it. I finished the Iliad, and boy, what an ending it was. The battle between Achilles and Hector finally takes place, and it's over pretty fast. I mean, everyone knows how it's going to turn out, not only the gods, but the mortals as well. There's been this crushing sense of inevitability that's been creeping into the story for the last several books of the Iliad. So the Trojans are all begging Hector not to go out and face him, and his mom has the brilliant idea to incentivize her son to stay by whipping out her own tit and being like, remember when you used to suck on this, son? And oddly enough, that does not work, and he wants to get out. all the more after that happens, and he runs around the city screaming for 3 laps away from Achilles until Athena disguises herself as his brother to convince him to turn and fight. And then as soon as he does, the brother, Athena, whatever, vanishes, and he realizes the gods don't like him, actually, and he dies, and his body is disgraced by the Greeks and dragged back, and they have the funeral for Patroclus, which is this very long section of funeral games until the Greeks or the Trojans buy his body back. And oddly enough, the Trojans don't offer all of the stuff that Troy stole. They don't offer Helen or all the other treasure that was taken from the Greeks, which would have, ended the war and maybe prevented their city from being utterly destroyed like they know is going to happen. But the prime instigators of the war, including Paris and Menelaus, the 2 men who are fighting over Helen, are barely mentioned after the first book of the Iliad. The Iliad is basically laser focused on the grievances between Achilles and Agamemnon and Hector. So it's like this self-contained story that's playing out within the war as opposed to telling the full story of the war. So throughout my reading, I really had to adjust my expectations for what this book was going to include. It was quite the slog for most of it, but I really did enjoy it at the end, especially. I love the sense of futility of war, of mourning and grief. This is not like this heroic, romanticized version of war. It's really just like, what are we doing as humans? Look at this horrific squabble and the cost it's given to all of us due to the gods' pettiness and all of this stuff. So it was not anywhere near as enjoyable as the Odyssey, that's for sure, but it was still interesting, and I'm glad that I've read it. I will be doing a full video to kind of give my whole thoughts on it. I'll first do a short video, and then I'll do a traditional, like, full-length review video on my main series of videos, so look forward to that. With the Iliad out of the way and finished, I can finally give you my general thoughts on it as a whole, and right from the get-go, I should say that I went into the Iliad with certain expectations that it did not meet, and that was mostly my own fault. I had kind of a misconception of what the Iliad was. I knew it covered the Trojan War, specifically the end of the Trojan War, and so naturally I assumed it would cover the big famous things like the Trojan horse and Achilles' heel. The intro of the book set me straight, though, where Emily Wilson lays out that no, it just is going to laser focus on the squabbles between Achilles and Agamemnon, and later Achilles and Hector. There were some things that I still expected even after that, because I had read the Odyssey, which was a lot of fun and really engaging. It was paced really well, and it had a lot of humor in it. But for the most part, the Iliad didn't have anything like this. It was just so focused on the battle, and the way that the battling played out was so-and-so killed so-and-so killed so-and-so. And while it was extremely graphic and gory, after a while, it just gets pretty overwhelming and it becomes quite a slog. There are some cutaways to the gods that kind of break up the action and give you something fresh. And it's funny because in the Odyssey this happens as well, but in the Odyssey it feels like you're cutting away from the action and having these interludes, so you just want to get back into it. But in the Iliad, every time it cut to the gods, I was like, oh, thank gosh, we have something else to focus on other than the pattern we've been stuck in since the start. And then Patroclus dies and the pattern finally breaks up and we get into that old fun Homer that I was used to from before. I also have should mention that I've read the Aeneid, which is the Roman accounting of this story, and it does cover things like the Trojan horse and the fall of Troy, and that stuff was so riveting. It was awesome. So I kind of almost am tempted to go back into the Aeneid as well and reread it and see how much more I appreciate it now that I really understand the background of the Iliad and stuff like that. But what I'm left with the Iliad is a pretty bleak send-off of the futility and the tragedy of war, which was quite something at the end. Like, it cuts off in such a clean way. It's almost nihilistic in the way that it wraps up. But anyway, going forward, what I'm going to do is a full video review of the Iliad, and after this, I'm now going to be jumping into the Odyssey,